Let's do it. So my name is Jason Taji. I am the CEO and co-founder of Farmobile. This is our sixth Info Ag show. Our company is about 6 years old, so we've been at a lot of these shows from the beginning, and it's really great to be back here. We've had a lot of really great experiences with the people that we've been able to meet along the way, and this has been really helpful in guiding a lot of our product direction and how we've grown over time. So as we get going here to talk about Farmobile, the title of the presentation is Be Ready for Real-Time Shifts in 2021. It's really all around data. And so we've talked about data for probably the better part of almost 2 decades now, but we haven't made the advances that I think the rest of the world anticipates that we have, and that all of this data is out there and it's ready for everyone to use and to gather insights from. And so with that, I figured I would start off by just walking through what we see as data and trying to make some visualizations to describe the problems that we have to solve before we can really start moving it around. So if we go to the first slide there, the one right after that, we'll come back to that one. This is really, I think, helpful in trying to understand, data is confusing. If you look at all these little Legos, we all remember Legos. And so you've got all this different data. You've got planting data, you've got harvest data, you've got, fertility data, you've got crop protection data, and you've got just this mess of different data sets sitting out there that we're trying to organize. And so if we move to the next slide, what needs to happen there is we need to be able to sort the data. And so some of the challenges that are involved here is data needs to be sorted by OEM because they have different file formats, and data needs to be sorted by activities. And there's a whole bunch of challenges that come from really just getting this data organized in a way that allows us to make use out of it. And so if we go to the next slide, once you get it organized by activity layer, then we got to start to put it into boundaries. And this is a really big challenge for the industry that everyone assumes, again, has been solved by someone else. But this is really a big part of, once you've gathered the data, then you have to be able to sort the data, and then you have to be able to organize the data before we get to do what's on the next slide, which is really the area that we're moving into now. It's when you get to actually layer the data and stack it on top of each other so that we can start to use this data in an interoperable format. And the thing that's different today than normal is the fact that there are a lot of other programs that are starting to become available for growers that help reflect good stewardship, and they require some proof points, and that is generally required in the form of some form of data. And so making data interoperable, the way you can stack it like this, is really important, because the programs don't really care what machines were used as the data was generated. They just want to make sure that they can validate some of the activities that have happened and the practices, and help the growers and the retailers tell the story of how these crops were produced. So with all of that being said, I think we're going to move into, you can go back to the introductions tab, Aggie, please, and we'll start to just have a conversation here. So as I mentioned before, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Farmobile. And on our panel today, we have Sally Fliss, who's the Director of Agronomy for the Fertilizer Institute. We have Steve Cubbage, who's the VP of Services for Farmobile. We also have Bradford Warner, who is our VP of Sustainability for Farmobile. And so as we get going here, I want to make this an open conversation. So if you have questions, please, please feel free to shoot some through the chat box there. And we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. And we really want to keep it as a conversation. And so, again, thank you, Sally, for joining us. I'm sure you all know that Sally is the Director of Agronomy at the Fertilizer Institute. Her background is in nutrient management, having served as a consultant for farmers in New York and Vermont, as well as technical support and marketing for feed and soil analysis services. Sally received her BS in dairy science and agronomy and an MS in dairy science from the University of Wisconsin. I'm from Minnesota, sorry about that. I was thinking badger. Yeah. And her PhD in plant and soil science from the University of Vermont. So thank you, Sally, for being here. I would like to start off by just asking you a couple of questions here. As you, as you start to participate in some of these programs, specifically the 4R program, and maybe I'll back up a second there. And can you just describe to us what the 4R program is about? Because it's getting more and more attention. We talked about it last year at InfoEgg on a panel, and we've had a lot of interest in this over the last year. Can you just help describe what that actually means?
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me to join you guys today. I'm glad to be able to participate. The 4R program has a bunch of different moving parts, and one of those pieces is our 4R certification program, which certifies ag retailers in right now Indiana, New York, and Ohio. Florida will be having some certified soon. Indiana, I already mentioned. Minnesota is the other one that'll be coming online. That's so we're getting at two different types of metrics in the 4R program right now, trying to build it up to show what the 4Rs really do across the landscape. One is the certification, where we're going to be able to look at the sort of geography, higher level metrics around nutrient use and nutrient loss and potential environmental impacts, versus our programs like the advocate program, where we're working with our 4R advocates to calculate on either an individual field or farm basis some of these environmental nutrient use efficiency metrics to show what's happening as farmers implement more advanced practices on the field. In addition to that, we've got the 4R Research Fund, where we're helping to fund from our member dollars on the ground research to figure out the metrics and economics across a wide variety of crops, everything from almonds to corn grain to cotton in those research projects.
So how important is data in the validation process, and what really happens today in the form of how you collect the information to help qualify for those programs?
Yeah, so data is super important because we can't make any statement. It's hard to make statements about impact without the data to back it up. So for the certification, we're still really at a point of talking about a number of acres that we're impacting. But what we want to be able to do is make statements about impacts on nitrous oxide emissions, impacts on decreased phosphorus loss, all the things that we know are happening from the research projects that we're funding, but we're still struggling to extrapolate out to a larger land base in order to show that real larger benefit of the practices farmers are implementing.
And do you see these processes, these programs are only going to grow as we go forward, right? Given the climate of what's happening right now, it just seems like this is something that finally we have, a lot of momentum behind these sorts of initiatives. Is that what your view is as well?
Yeah, we continue to see interest and growth in the certification program to work with the retailers. We're just in the process of selecting our 2021 for our advocates, which will bring us to 10 years of advocates and 100 advocate, a total of 100 advocates that cover probably 250,000+ acres across the US. So all these programs continue to grow, and we've got to take advantage of the data that we have to start spreading the news about what farmers are doing right on the ground.
Great. Well, I'd like to invite Bradford Warner, who is our VP of Sustainability here at Farmobile, to hop into the conversation now as well. Bradford, will you give a quick introduction?
No, I appreciate it, Jason. There's a few barriers, I think, to broader marriage between conservation projects and, frankly, economic impact that has bugged me for a long time that I've been in the industry. And, over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been infrequent to find projects that really were able to align practices. They could be 4R practices, as Sally described. They could be other conservation practices, kind of part and part to the actual impact of those, both on yield productivity. So not total yield, right, Jason? It's easy to go chase yield that's frankly unprofitable or actually gives us a low quality crop that the processors or downstream users don't want. But to marry that up with something that is fully understood of what the economic impact is at a field level. I think where I get really excited, right, is you see something that starts to intrinsically form a virtuous cycle. And I think what Sally is describing here does that, because I think TFI is doing phenomenal work that shows that the 4R practices aren't just good for your field. They aren't just good for your farmstead. They aren't even just good for your watershed. They're also probably sound economic decisions to be making over time. So I think part of our mission as we talk with folks, not only at InfoAg, but generally, is, okay, how do we help broaden that understanding up? So if you're going to do 4R, let's make sure you've got an extensive system of record behind that, so you can use that data now day in and day out with your trusted advisors, right?
Absolutely. So you mentioned system of record, Bradford, and Aggie, would it be possible to pull up slide 8 in our deck there that just kind of shows us what we talk about from a system of record standpoint? We've got at Farmobile, we've had to overcome over the last, I'm going to say, 6 or 7 years, a bunch of challenges for getting this data into the point where we can actually make it, usable and consumable by other systems. And so when we talk about, a digital system of record, we're really talking about a digital strategy and a broader digital strategy. So we've been able to work with a lot of ag retailers, and the 4R program has been a big piece of kind of the foundation of getting started for a lot of these ag retailers to be able to create a system of record. And so when we say a system of record, what this does is we've got devices that are on the pieces of equipment, whether they be fertilizer rigs or tenders or sprayers. And what we're doing is creating an interoperable digital record. We call them an EFR, an electronic field record, which allows for the activity of that operation to be recorded with quite a bit of detail. And so that's important for a lot of ag retailers. One, because they might want to make sure that they have these records if there's any, application challenges or questions. And so just being able to have that record and show where that went. And most ag retailers are running a mixed fleet of equipment, so this is a non-trivial thing to pull off. So you've got some red stuff, you've got some yellow stuff, and you've got some green stuff. And so having that system of record of when the machine entered what field, what was going on, and then we can start to tie that in with a few other data sources like weather and some of the other stuff, you start to get it truly is just a system of record. It's a recording of exactly what happened on what day and what machines and in what fields. And so from that, we kind of find our ag retailers then fall into 2 subcategories after that. One of them is around, on the left there, we talk about a system of product performance. And so that's really getting all of the layers. It's getting the fertility layer, the as planted layers, the crop protection layers, and the harvest layers, and then being able to take all of those layers and share them with others. In the past, the big challenge was, from a grower's perspective, was to get that data into an FMIS system and try to figure out how to make better decisions. We don't have that one figured out yet. There's a lot of room for us to do better there. But what's becoming even a greater demand for interoperable data is the fact that we have these other programs that exist now, where it's not just the grower trying to get their planting and harvest data into an FMIS system. It's trying to get products that were custom applied, collected, and get those into the FMIS system. And then we've got other types of insurance that are starting to become available, and lenders asking for the ability to give, discounts on operating lines by having this data available. And then we've got all these programs like the 4R programs and different sort of stewardship programs that are starting to become available. So it's not just the grower and their data and their FMIS anymore. It's really become this thing where we have to be able to share the data between all of these other parties who traditionally weren't really in this game, I'm going to say, or in this, in this field of work. And so that's what's becoming more and more important. And so on the left-hand side there, we say that we're a system of product performance for a lot of our customers when we can combine farmers and ag retailers and really kind of marry up all of this data for them in a very simple way. But then on the right-hand side, we're also a system of asset, I call it optimization or machine performance, where an ag retailer can see all of their machines running around no matter what brand they are in almost real time with about a 3-second delay. And they can start to make sure that they're optimizing the use of that machine. And so the reason that becomes important is because a lot of times the as applied records today are not shared with the growers because of the difficulty in collecting them and organizing them and presenting them. But I really do believe that in the future, that's going to become a requirement. Having that as applied data delivered to your growers who employ you to do some work for you, I think the next day is going to be a turnaround time that we all have to get used to being able to get that data in the hands as a receipt, a system of record to that grower so they can start to really take advantage of a lot of these programs that are out there. And with that, I would like to have Steve hop on here too and have Steve give us a couple comments, introduce yourself and kind of talk about that system of record part from the optimization standpoint.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jason. I've been with Farmobile here full-time for about 2 years. I come from a precision ag background and a farming background in Southwest Missouri. But one of the things that that's been very interesting over the past 6 to 8 months, especially since COVID has hit, I've been amazed at, this whole idea of sustainability and all the topics we're talking about. Probably thought it'd take a back seat to some of the obviously things we're dealing with now. It's actually thrusted into the forefront. So I think one of the things, especially that Sally, in the 4-hour program, that she talked about, the 4-hour program I see as pretty much the launching pad as far as the collection of data that is needed as a farmer, a producer, and even from an ag retail standpoint, in order to participate in some of these sustainability programs, these carbon metric programs. And for the first time, I think the farmer is being asked for data that is needed outside of his inner circle. I mean, it's really been agronomy focused up to this point, and we've really got a real ask from multiple entities, from a General Mills to a FedEx, you name it. They may be in the market for your data, and I think it's a wake-up call for us to make sure that we've got the digital assets and the digital data to be able to prove what Sally talked about we need to prove.
What have been some of the challenges, Steve, from your experiences of just collecting that data in the past? What have been some of the pitfalls? I mean, it seems like there's a pretty big opportunity for the modernization of this record keeping, and either, I mean, the way I look at it, the retailer who's providing some of the services here and being a trusted partner, they're going to be the ones who are going to have to answer a lot of these questions, right? They're going to be the ones, I believe, that the growers are going to go to and ask for as applied fertility maps, or ask for some of these different requests. It's really a matter of helping those retailers hone in their skills on how to provide these services that I believe in the future, the future of ag retail is going to be around being able to accommodate these requests. Talk to that a little bit.
I think definitely, I mean, trusted advisors obviously play a huge role in this, and in the sustainability space, a lot of this, initially has been asked of the growers, but I think a lot of it's going to be asked of ag retailers, applicators, and especially the trusted advisors, because at the end of the day, this data is going to have to multitask in areas that we haven't even really discovered yet. And I think that's important, and it's really going to sort out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And as far as trusted advisors goes, they're going to have to step it up a notch. I think here in the next year to 2 years, it's going to be a lot's going to be asked of them on behalf of these growers, and there's a whole new meaning to trusted advisors that I think is going to be defined here in the next 6 to 6 months to 2
I think, and
years.
not to lose sight of the bigger picture, Jason. Yeah, system of record, to the points you've already made, are tremendous value for in-field management and for maximizing the efficiency of practices you're doing for dollars and yield. I think that let's not lose it that the system of record is of value to a lot of people up and down the supply chain, as Steve referenced. And I think once you have that and you have it inside an engine that allows you to selectively share it, permission by a grower, now you can say, all right, is this fulfilling a traceability requirement, for example, where there's an attribute around it? It could be glyphosate use, for example, that now can be associated with that crop. And that offers the opportunity to make a commodity not a commodity to an extent, which is obviously very advantageous for the grower financially. I think it also allows us collectively to look at the impact of really smart practices. And we talked a little bit earlier this year about the impact of variable rate technology and how using Farmobile with the combination of an FMS in the form of AgWorld was making a huge difference for a client in being able to scale variable rate technology acres. I'd love to get Sally's view on that, because I think VRT has to make a difference immediately for the retailer and the farmer themselves, but I think it'll make a good difference for a whole supply chain who's trying to make commitments around GHG, water quality, et cetera.
That's a perfect segue. So Sally, I was going to ask you, like, this is all good for us to talk about, but can you give us some examples of how we work with the Fertilizer Institute and you and your team in Ohio and Minnesota, and some of the programs that we've been working on, and really how someone who isn't as familiar with how this whole thing starts, you could maybe help walk us through some of those different projects we've worked on together.
Sure. So the thought that keeps popping into my head as Steve and Bradford were making comments is the first link that needs to be made is obviously that link from the data collected by the farmer to that farm management system. But then, as Steve and Bradford kept mentioning, we need to make that next link, which is how do we get this out to either consumer packaged good companies or programs like the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium or NORI or Indigo or whoever it is that you decide you might want to dabble around with carbon credits, which, just a plug for tomorrow morning, we'll be talking about a little bit more tomorrow morning as well. So that participation in those markets, or participation in water credits, quality credits that are being talked about in different states, can be given or created easily without the farmer having to go back to an original data set and then add it into another system. And we can make that a seamless process to help advance these different programs to the advantage of the producer and the environment and all the different sustainability goals that are out there across the landscape.
So from a grower's perspective, what type of data is required today to start to participate in one of those programs?
So that's part of the challenge. Is it varies. It depends on which protocol you're looking at. It depends on which program you want to participate in. But a lot of it is already being collected. There's some gaps in the data in the ESMC, Ecosystem Service Market Consortium, for example. They also want to get at things like fuel use, which I think you can get off of some of the more modern equipment pretty easily as part of a data download. But if you're not there, how do you get at how many gallons of fuel are you using? Do you just base it on a metric? Do you actually calculate it? We've got one 4R advocate who actually has taken the time. He calculates that on his own every year because he just wants to know how fuel efficient his own pieces of equipment are. But not everybody's at that point. So it varies a little bit, but then you've got some of the other protocols. The CAR protocol, if you look just at the nitrogen one, really only wants to know nitrogen rate and whether or not you're using an enhanced efficiency fertilizer product. So that's a little bit lower data demand than going into something as broad spectrum as like the Ecosystem Service Market.
So I have a question for you, Sally, as far as if somebody like, a FedEx or somebody else is going to be writing checks for carbon credits, I would think that down the road that there's got to be something more than just a checkbox of this is what I said I did. There has to be some other digital proof.
Yeah, and that's kind of the stumbling block that all these protocols are sort of at right now. Despite all of the news and press coverage that these carbon markets get, there is yet to be any real certified sales of farmer carbon credits to, say, somebody like a FedEx or a Delta Airlines. There's some activity going on financially where farmers are getting paid for more of the emission reduction versus the actual sequestration of carbon. So there's a lot of variety in what's really happening, and a lot of the programs where there's payments been made are really just based on an individual agreement between that company and that farmer. And they're really not out part of one of these larger markets where you might get a FedEx, for example, reviewing what you're doing. But yeah, that's really the stumbling point we're starting to see in these programs, is how do we certify that what the farmer's doing on the ground, that the soil sample that was taken, that the soil carbon that's there is really there, so that a company like a FedEx is confident in those credits that they're buying.
And obviously you'll speak to it more tomorrow morning, Sally, but I think in general, this is an issue that we want to be able to tackle, again, back at a virtuous cycle layer, right? What are the practices that are good for the environment anyway, are good for the grower's individual field level profitability anyway, and they also then generate potentially a new incremental stream, which is obviously part of a Farmobile model, right, Jason, that you had many years ago. So, carbon markets, I think, open up the possibility to not only reward good behavior, but reward better record keeping that allows them to get to that level. And I think the piece I struggle with sometimes, Sally, is no different than I think what a lot of the industry has to fess up to. It's kind of like making announcements, like you said, and then not always having all the particulars behind it. We make a lot of announcements about ag tech advancement, but a Farm Journal study that was published earlier this year made it clear we still have a long ways to go there. That in their study that was published, about 62% of users were still not using a farm level data software in 2019. And that 46% of those guys or gals were still managing their data primarily on paper records. So, let's hope that, I'll use Jason's term, that this is a push towards modernization, and there can be a good independent system of record under the control of a grower to provide that. Because if there's still such a high dissatisfaction rate, I think that same study said around 70% of those who are using software were still not really feeling that software met all their needs. And I think what it sounds like all of us are poking at from a different angle is that still comes back to data quality, garbage in, garbage out. It's got to get fixed.
I think that's really one of the challenges that we see today all the time, is the fact that there's incomplete data, and there's a lot of incomplete data out there. And so we try to fill in the gaps of the incomplete data. And that's where we start to fall down, I think, from an industry of having a good set of data that helps us make decisions, rather than having a partial set of data. The more incomplete data we have, I think, ag tech, I'm going to say 1.0 was about gathering as much data as you can and trying to figure out if we can find data scientists that can make magic out of all of the mess. And I think we've learned that it's not hard to gather large piles of data, but the quality of that data has been of a level that it hasn't really added the promise of what we know is out there and what we're capable of from the tools that are available today. Steve, you've been around this thing for a long time. Those first yield monitors are 20, 25 years ago now, and it's like we're just now starting to maybe see the promise of taking this thing to the next level. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think, obviously this industry still suffers. We talk about last mile problems. This industry still suffers from what I call the first mile problem, and that is really having that full portfolio of basic field level data being collected, whether it's at the farmer level or at the ag retail level. And a lot of times those are two ships that pass in the night and never see each other. And that's going to be a problem. If that's still the case, we have a problem moving forward, especially in programs like 4R and sustainability. So we've got to basically bring that data together. That data has to flow. And you've got a lot of programs out there that need data or data hungry. And right now, a lot of them are starving because so.
Steve, this is Justin. To that end, there's a question in the chat. What about farm gate level engagement? How many farmers are collecting enough data to meet opportunities ahead? I know we've talked about this internally. Can you comment a little bit on digital engagement at the grower level and how that impacts, that first mile, last mile conversation?
I think a lot of it depends on the engagement of the farmer first, or that producer first, as far as what, if he deems it important. Unfortunately, I think a lot at ag retail levels, they can even answer that question saying that only 10% of their acres are fully digitally engaged in most cases. It may be higher depending on the retailer, but there is still a definite disengagement or disenfranchisement from many growers to taking it to the next level that's really going to be required of them in the future. So we've seen that in the past. I mean, early on when some of these programs first rolled out, as far as just even picking a variety, certain variety, and needing 3 years worth of harvest data, good harvest data, that was hard to come by. And I bet you that we maybe haven't moved the needle a whole lot. The data just needs to flow, and it needs to be consistent, and all the ingredients need to be there to bake that cake.
I think, Steve, the other thing is the first mile problem is a challenge, right? Rural internet connectivity is tough. You've got to engineer systems. I think that's one thing that's really unique about what we've done at Farmobile, is be able to stream that data out of the cab every second. It really helps us overcome a lot of the bandwidth challenges you have, because as we have new machines, we have more sensors on them. More sensors make the file larger, and our rural internet connectivity isn't speeding up to the level that our expansion of sensors and data available on the machines has done. And the other thing I wanted to say there is collecting the data is difficult. Okay, so using a device to get the data organized in the cab is difficult, right? Getting that data into a database, that's the challenge you're talking about, but those are two big problems to overcome. Then you have to bring it all together, and you got to clean it, and you got to organize it. But the part that everybody misses, I believe, and this is the biggest opportunity, I think, in agriculture and ag tech for sure, is the ability to get that data out quickly in a format that can be consumed by others, because others are going to add the value. And I think in ag tech 1.0, if you will, it was all about gathering that data and holding on to it. And I'm going to give everybody else all the products they need because I'm going to have the most data. And I think that is it's a really short-sighted way to look at it. And I think a lot of ag retailers outsourced their grower digital strategies to others who had products that were tied to, bundles of seed and crop protection and other things. And I think we're starting to see kind of the other side of that, right? We're starting to see, well, why do I want to let all of that data go over there when I want this data for me to use to help my customers? So I think this interoperability and the ability to get that data out is something that as an industry, we are going to get better and better and better at. And that's a big change from where it was 5 years ago. So I think that's a really important piece, because all of these programs require the ability to validate and verify the practices that were used.
Absolutely.
Do we have any other questions there, Justin, that we could tackle?
Yeah, so what level of internet service measured by up and down or symmetrical bandwidth in this case is needed to future-proof support needed to support data collection, storage, and analytics? That was from Heather.
Wow, that's a lot there. I'm going to say that it's the difference between if you purchase a movie on iTunes, let's say, right, and you have to download the whole movie before you get to watch it. It's a pretty big file. But if you stream it, you can get away with a much smaller bandwidth connection that allows you to take little bits and pieces of it at a time. And that's really, I'm going to say, for Farmobile services, we really rely on cellular networks. Generally, they're LTE networks or 4G networks, and I believe they're about an 8 megabit per second connection, somewhere around there. And we've specially designed it so that every second we're firing off a message that gets put back together in the cloud from the machine. And so if we lose cellular connectivity, we timestamp and we store that packet of information on the device, on the hard drive of the device in the cab, And so when you get back into cellular connectivity, you can burst those little messages back up. And again, there are a bunch of puzzle pieces that get put together in the cloud. And that's really what the advantage of doing it that way is. So we've been able to get really pretty good data. I'm going to say, you know, we're in at least 18 states now, I believe. We might even be higher than that. And there are a few pockets where we've had to maybe switch a cellular carrier, but generally we've had pretty good luck of getting the data up that we've been able to collect in unreliable low bandwidth environments. And so that's one of the things I think that one of the innovations that we've really led the way on from a streaming data perspective. And I'm not talking about updating once a minute. I'm talking about within 3 seconds being able to see what that machine is doing just about anywhere. So I'm going to say that getting that data to the cloud doesn't require nearly as large a bandwidth connection as a lot of people anticipate if you're not sending that whole file at once. I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, but I can tell you that we're really pretty good at getting data up in some places where people are surprised.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for the chat, or you can certainly raise your hand and ask a live question as well to Jason or Sally or anybody on the panel.
So one question, Justin, that I think came to us in person, not here through chat, but is good for us to tackle, is to talk about practices inside the field and things that are actually going to move the needle, as we've said, you know, synergistically for farmers. And there was a study produced earlier this year looking at the adoption of conservation practices at the farm gate. And it was a statistically relevant sample size. It was well over 500 producers that had been interviewed. And while some things you could say there was a plurality of farmers using them, either on a portion or all of their acres, like obviously intelligent crop rotation, pest management, or some form of either conservation tillage or no-till. You know, some things were still lagging down there, particularly, you know, water management, cover crops, and the 4 R's. And so when you think about getting back to making a difference, you know, Sally, as a PhD, where do you see differences that we should be helping to drive the discussion with good data that are practices that are going to have the biggest impact, so that, frankly, farmers see a return on the effort they're spending around data versus maybe where they haven't in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. It's going to depend on what nutrient we're looking at, what the kind of biggest bang for our buck piece is, and then it's really looking at it at a systems level. So for example, if we're thinking of phosphorus, the fastest way for us to reduce phosphorus loss from a field is to get that phosphorus below the soil surface and incorporate it with the soil somehow. But some of the practices you were just mentioning, the no-till, low-till systems, cover crops, can make it difficult to make that practice happen. So how do we make those two things work together so that we're getting those soil health benefits we get from some of these reduced tillage practices, from adding a cover crop to intercropping or whatnot, with the most effective way to reduce soluble phosphorus loss is to get that fertilizer or that nutrient source below the surface. So that's really, you know, that's an easy one to think about, but it's really that systems level approach. I always like to say 4R is the base of everything. It doesn't matter which conservation practice you choose. If you're not reevaluating the source, rate, timing, and placement of their nutrient application with that infield conservation practice, something's probably not going to work right. Either the conservation practice isn't going to be effective, your crop's going to suffer, you're going to spend more than you want to spend on your nutrient sources. But you've really got to think about them all together. We can't just pick no-till and not think about nutrient application, or just pick cover crops and not think about nutrient application at the same time.
Agreed.
Steve, do you want to say anything regarding some of the I'm going to say, you know, the asset management that we've worked on with some of the, you know, when we have devices in cabs, we have those two branches. We've got the product performance and the record keeping on that side, but then we've got the optimization of the asset. And that seems to be, from an ag retail perspective, probably the thing that they get the immediate return on, right? When we talk about value, it seems like asset utilization is something that we've been able to really help move the needle on in a lot of these places. Do you want to speak to that a bit from your services group?
Well, sure. I kind of got a little bit of chuckle for what Sally was describing of the farmer trying to decipher, fuel efficiency and doing it almost by longhand. And that data is fully available coming through, the CAN bus on these machines. So we've really taken that whole portfolio of data that second set of data that a lot of people haven't delved into as far as just beyond the agronomic piece, but there's, every trip across that field, whether you're an ag retailer or even a farmer, there's efficiency involved as far as, we've discovered that obviously there's a lot of idle time out there, a lot of machines racking up hours that probably could be managed a lot better. And all that data it's no different than manage your fertilizer. I mean, you manage your hours and machines the same way, and literally 25% of your input costs as far as our overhead costs are machine related. If you're a grower, especially at ag retailers, probably even higher. So we've taken that, really dissected that as far as from an efficiency standpoint, looking at individual machines as far as idle time, transport time, and working time. And sometimes, working time for some of these ag retailers is 25 to 30%. And truthfully, you're being tagged $140, $150 to $200 an hour for those machines, whether it's working or whether it's idling.
Well, and that's one of the things too that we do at Farmobile is we collect the machine and the agronomic data in that same payload of message that's going up. And so you don't have to merge multiple data sets to get that, right? Sometimes you got the agronomy data from this source and you got the engine data from this source, and you try to bring those two together. That all comes along for the ride with the way that we're collecting data there. So as we look forward to some of these programs, we're going to be in a really good position to have some real ground truth data there that's going to help validate.
I do. I think that's huge from a fleet perspective, because if you're an ag retailer, and most ag retailers are running some type of mixed fleet. I mean, it's very rare for, compared to maybe some farmers all one color. Ag retail is very diverse, and being able to analyze those across multiple, being colorblind and analyze that data as from an efficiency and a machine standpoint is huge. And that's what's really cool about the metrics that we can produce. And it's real money. It's real money at the end of the day to the bottom line of these ag retailers and also these growers.
Well, we're right at time right now. So I want to thank everyone. Sally, I want to thank you for joining. Steve, Bradford, as always, enjoy the conversation. For everyone that attended here, we're going to be sending you a pair of orange gloves. So we're going to have some I'm going to say goodies to send out to you. We appreciate you all being here and participating in the session. We look forward to working with many of you as we go forward here, and we wish you all a happy and healthy, holiday season, and let's get 2020 in the books and get rolling on 2021 here. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.